Okay, here we're going to look at different objects, and I just pulled up this Red Dot Awards for electronics, product design, and we see these big overall shapes, right? And of course, we're all pretty into creating the overall shape, but when it comes down to detail, the buttons and everything, I think it's very important because it does convey kind of a sense of quality and style, and it's important because you kind of establish the tactility of your product, and which says a lot. Ergonomically, the details can convey a lot of the quality of your product. So it's just something to be aware of, and something to to model, to transfer that into your SolidWorks models. So that's one of the things we're going to take a look at. And in this next page over here on Pinterest, pull up a couple of buttons just to search for product buttons, and a lot of stuff comes out. So you can see some of the detailing that goes on, not only with the buttons, but with some textures and surfaces. So I just got a kind of really simple one. This racetrack going around the set of possibly a knob, a volume knob, and a power button with a few LEDs in the middle. So you can turn on your rulers, Command R. Sets a ruler, so from there you can drag out your guides. Right, just a couple, one vertical, one horizontal. And right in the center, you go center out. Yeah, remember to hit the option to go center, to start a rectangle from the center. And over here you see these dots over here in the corners, because I use the rounded rectangle. And what those are by expanding that, going in and out from the corner, you can pull out the roundness of those corners. So if you go all the way to the center, you will get a full round for this rectangle. So it's still officially a rectangle, but it's basically like this racetrack shape. Okay, so once that's completed, then we're going to go in and switch out the colors for the fill and the stroke. So right now it's kind of this gray fill. You hit the switch button, becomes a gray stroke being the line. If I look over here on stroke, over here in the menu, I can increase its size. And it's one of those visual things that Illustrator renders on the fly. Just give it a point size. There is still just one line in the middle of that. And then the stroke width is applied after that. So one of the things I'll do too is on the under a line stroke, you see how it's right in the middle? The line being in the middle with the graphic being on the outside. You can change that around. You can put it all to the inside or the whole thing to the outside if you wish. So it doesn't have to be right in the middle. So I'm going to go to the inside because I want a 50 point, in this case, stroke on this. Actually, I want to go a little lower. We'll go to 38 or so. So then once I have my rectangle with a stroke on the inside, I'm going to get the Ellipse Tool to make the circles. And I can just make them off this center line here, this vertical line. But I can, if I want to align it to kind of the tangent edge of the corners, I can insert a couple more rulers so that it can all just be nicely aligned with all that stuff. And also notice that it does take the same attributes as the first line that we made, this rectangle. So the graphic is on the inside for the line. You can see as I'm dragging, it starts to snap certain things to the edges, to the corner, tries to find a good location for that. And it's not really doing the center, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is pull out a new ruler, going to the tangent. And there is a point there so that you can easily just snap to that. snaps to that corner. So now I know that the center of that circle is located right there. So now I can just drag that over. And now everything's aligned there. Okay, so I'm going to do a fill. And I'll do a switch. I Option and Shift dragged that circle. Do it again. So Shift to constrain either vertical or horizontal, in this case vertical, and hold down the Option to copy it. And there you go. So that one I'm going to make actually a little bit smaller. It's going to be the push button. Okay, so now I'm going to make the LED areas right in the center there. So I'm going to use the kind of a combination of circle and the blend tool for that. So initially I get the ellipse tool again for the circle, these small LEDs. I'm going to copy that over. Remember Shift, Option, do that again. Shift and Option, copy it over. You can see it's snapping or trying to align to different elements within the object. And here are kind of these two opposing tangents. All right, you always kind of want to find some alignments there. And so the next thing, I want to get the in-between LEDs, and I want to get them, evenly spaced between that. And I can also, Option click and do that stuff and hit the align. But I want something that's more live. So I'm going to go to the blend options and specify the steps first. I'm going to do 2 steps in between, so it's 4 altogether. And then you have to actually apply the blend. So I'm going to go to blend and then make after I've selected both of those elements. So now it places the 2 in between. All right, so what's the difference there? So if you were to, right now it's kind of a live group or a live blend there within a group. So if you were to select the whole thing, you can move the entire thing. But if you double click it, you can then get one of the elements, drag it around, and the blend updates live, which is nice to see, especially with alignments and things like that. So in this case, you can just double click that group, select one of them, and you can see the in-betweens kind of updating. So it's useful as well. Place it back there. And so now we have both of those elements, and everything looks nicely aligned. And what I'll do next here is grab everything, copy it, bring it into Photoshop. So in Photoshop, I started an 8.5 by 11 sheet as well, 300 DPI. And in this case, the DPI doesn't matter so much. It's more of the size of the paper. And in this case, I pasted it. So it asks you, how do you want to paste it? I'm going to paste as pixels. There it is. So it renders pretty much the same as it is in Illustrator. And I have a layer right below it, so you can see the transparency of just the elements that got copied over. So everything's as these separate pieces. So what I want to do is separate them all out. One of the first things, though, is also put some color to the background. Right now, it's just filled with white, that entire layer. So what I'm going to do is use some of the layer styles for that. We'll see in a second here. There's all the transparencies, all the elements. So what I want to do is break out all these pieces from each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this layer. So you can see that I'm just going to copy this over to the plus sign at the bottom. And there's a couple ways to duplicate layers. In this case, the easiest is just to drag it over to the plus sign, at least for me. I'm on a Wacom tablet, and it's just easy to do that. So now I have 3 identical layers, and each one of these is going to become its own element. So I'm going to call the first one, the bottommost one, rim, then the knob, and then the LEDs. Okay, so I'm going to hide the last two, concentrate on rim, and delete the items that make up that don't make up the rim. So I'm just going to erase that out. So I'm going to grab the eraser with a hard brush, so it's got some hard edges there. You can increase the size by going with the close bracket. All right, the ones next to the P on the keyboard. Those two brackets there. So then you can just erase the elements that don't belong in the rim. You can see it there. So now I'm going to go to the knobs, and I'm going to delete, first of all, the rim and the LEDs. Just go around, delete those elements. And now on the last one, I'll show that one, hide the previous one, and then the LEDs are the ones that are going to be left on this one. And you'll see why I want to separate everything out in just a second. So I leave the elements that make up the LEDs. I show everything. And now I show this background layer, this layer 0 that I have here that's filled with white. Now, if you were to double click this, what's going to bring up is the layer style. And in there, there's a number of attributes that you can apply to your layer. And they'll only apply to what's opaque, not the entire thing. In this case, the entire background here is filled with white. So if I use the color overlay for this, what I'll do is turn that on. Turn that on, and then choose its color. And there's the color there. There's a default color usually, but if you click on the color box there and go over to your image, it turns into an eyedropper. And so you can select a color from that. So in this case, I'm just going to click on that gray color because I want that same gray there. So you can kind of try to get close, but since you have the eyedropper, might as well just click on that. So I kind of want a little bit of a monochrome look to this. So I'll click OK. Color overlay is on. There it is, right beneath the layer. You'll see it says effects, and then color overlay is what's being applied. You can turn that off and then see some of the how it's affecting your image. Okay, so now I'm going to go over here to the rim, and I'm going to double click that. Layer style comes up again, and in this case I'm going to apply the bevel and emboss. What that'll do is whatever's opaque, remember it just works on the opaque elements. What it'll do is it'll look like it's lifted off the page because it's going to add a highlight on the edges basically. And in this case, if I double click this again to activate it, remember all these are live effects. What you'll see is I have outer bevel introduced, and if I just switch it over to inner bevel, it's going to apply that effect on the inside of whatever's opaque. In this case, it's outer bevel, so it's going to go to the outside. So always be aware of if you want it to kind of look like it's lifted and it's sort of the fillet's tapering up to meet that element. If you change the size, kind of changes your diameter. Just be careful of how many pixels you go, because sometimes they may cross over like you saw there. You can change the softness to kind of give it a little bit more of a soft look to those edges, and just play around with the parameters. There's a number of different parameters, not only with the size, shape, direction of that bevel, but also the color and the opacity of those. So you can change the opacity of that white. You can see the highlights set to screen, shadow set to multiply. So you can set kind of how dark and light those values are by changing the opacity on those. And then the other thing too is the direction, the direction of those elements. And oh yeah, the gloss contour, you can change the contour of that. It doesn't have to be just a linear like it is set now. You see it comes with some presets for that. So you can play around with, how that looks. Sometimes they might ramp up in a different way or accelerate a little bit faster before it gets into the highlight. You can kind of look at that as a sort of profile for the fillet. In this case, I'll just go back to linear. Look at that little circle there as a sphere, and you can then change the light source direction. And not only the direction, but the height as well. The closer it is to the center, the higher it is above the object, and the closer it is to the edge, it's more of an edge-on look. Okay, so, and I also have use global light on, because the same value can be applied, the same direction and angle can be applied to multiple layers. So that kind of sets a global uniform look. That way you don't have highlights going in a different direction on other layers. Okay. So now, we keep the monochrome look, the rim the same color as the background. The only thing that's setting it off is that bevel and emboss. So now I'm going to double click on the knobs. I'm going to use drop shadow in this case. And there are two drop shadows. Some, might have different attributes. That's one of the things that you can, it's got that plus sign next to it. You can add multiple drop shadows and things. So usually go to the bottom most one there. And with that, you can see that it just sets a drop shadow to that element. Remember, again, whatever's opaque, it's getting a drop shadow. You can set the opacity for that. Go a little bit higher if you want it darker. It's as if the knobs were coming towards you off the screen, and so the shadow recedes from that. And then there's also a spread. So that just gives maybe how big the light source is. So smaller the spread, the bigger the light source. So the size is also kind of a blurriness, I guess you could say, to the final object. So that could also indicate maybe a softness to the or a more diffused light. So you can play around with those elements to your liking. And this one also has contour, but won't play around with that one at this point. The other thing that I'll say though is, we do want to highlight around the knob itself. So I'm going to also apply a bevel and emboss on this one. So this one's going to have a couple of other parameters in that it is going to go to the inside, and this, as opposed to the rim that the highlight went to the outside, this one I'm going to use an inner bevel, because it has more of a filler around the rim of this, or the edge of these knobs. So smaller size, so kind of a finer highlight. It's on the inside, still using the global light, so it's the same direction and angle. Notice if I change this one, now it affects both the rim and the knobs, even though they're not on the same layer. So now I hit OK. And you'll also see this little black dot there. Sometimes when you're erasing elements from a layer, some little piece, kind of stays. So you may just have to erase out one of those elements. So if I use the erase tool, erase that tiny, there might be just a couple pixels that were left from the other layer. You erase those, and then the shadow goes away. Remember, it's being the layer effect is being applied to everything that's on that layer, so including that little stray pixel. So now with the LEDs, these are going to be a little bit different. It's going to have a color overlay, and as with any LEDs that are lit, of course they're going to be bright, So set kind of a bluish white light to them, fairly bright. So that's the color overlay. That's the first thing I apply. Next thing is going to be a outer glow, because LEDs, they'll tend to glow. So I'm going to apply that to it. The default color is this kind of brown color, so I also want to apply this bluish white light to it. And instead of multiply, which only affects a darkening of that color, I'm going to set it to screen, so it goes to a lighter color. And then you can control how what the spread's going to be, what the size is going to be, and the opacity. You don't want to go overboard with the brightness, but you want it to show as well. So you can play around with those parameters back and forth there. So those are the LEDs. You can set a contour to those to kind of show a ramp up or down. And let's see, I think we'll just go with this kind of ramp up possibly. And so depending on the size, you can just keep playing around with the spread and the size and the opacity for them until they look just right. Remember, you don't want to ever overpower your illustration with just this super bright LED, but you want it to show as LEDs. And then the last thing too, you may want to use a bevel and emboss there, because this may be that these LEDs are separate. So there's a hole punched in the plastic, and the LED light bulb maybe is poking through that hole. So you may want to show that by using a pillow emboss, which goes down and then back up. So it's kind of a ramp in and out at the same time. So it shows an inner bevel and an outer bevel at the same time. So that's the pillow emboss effect, also in bevel and emboss. So that's the style of bevel and emboss. Because the light is on top of that, I may want to bring down the opacity for the shadow and the highlight, so it looks like the glow is sort of overtaking some of that darkness. Those little details that make it work. And then in this next part, we're going to start talking about text and graphics that are going to go over your product here. So I'm going to grab the text tool, start typing some stuff in. Maybe you just want volume, and I do want everything that pretty much live. So if you hit the T key, it gets your text tool. You can type some stuff in, and then you can go back. You hit Enter to close out the text tool. Hit V to change things around. But as you have that layer selected, and you hit the T key without necessarily selecting all of the text, what you can do is change the color of the text. So instead of having to select all the text and then change the color, you can just select the layer with the T, because otherwise, if it's selected, what it's going to do is going to invert the color. You don't know what color you're applying. So if you have the layer selected with the T key, you can change the color, and you can see it update live. So as with the other layers, the other thing you can do is also add a layer style to the text itself, and do the same thing, color overlay for that. So if that's the case, you can just go in, turn on color overlay for that layer, hit OK, and it becomes a color overlay on that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another set of text here. Maybe that's a channel or something like that. So I'm going to go just with a 1 underneath the first LED. So applying the color now, what I can do is just option drag that color overlay from the first one, from the volume, and just drag it up to the other layers. And so if I option drag, makes a copy, you can see the one that now has the color overlay applied to it. And we can keep going with that, to every one of those single layers, but that can get a little bit tedious. And not only tedious, but What will happen is that if you do need to change the color, you'll have to change it to every one of those effect styles and color overlays. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is get all those text elements, those layers, and drop them into a folder. Let's select it, drag those down into the folder, not the plus, but the folder. Makes a folder out of them. And I did forget one of the text layers, so I'm going to drop that into the folder as well. So now that color overlay that I have, right now it's being applied to the number 1. So I'm just going to drag that, without copying it, I'm going to drag it up into the folder. So now everything that is in that folder is going to get that color overlay applied to it. So it's a really good way of applying the same color, the same effect, to multiple items in one folder. So, you know, all that text is live. You can change the text, you can move it around, do all that kind of stuff, delete it, add new text. As long as it's in that folder, it's going to have that color applied to it. So, you know, that could represent a screen, possibly, if it's or pad printing ink. You know, you always have to separate your colors by, you know, by these different plates or passes. So I'm going to add a gradient. And in this case, I'm going to add a radial gradient instead of just a linear gradient. So go radial, so it looks like they have a little bit of a doming. And because they're both together, what it's doing is placing that gradient right in the center of both of them. So I don't really need to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate both of these knobs. So I click OK. I'm going to copy it by going over to the plus and then delete one knob from one side and then the lower knob or button from the other layer. And that way the radial gradation gets applied to the center of each one of those layers. So you can see it's the exact same radial gradation being applied. And in this case, I don't want the black to show. So what I'm going to do is set it to screen, the mode to screen, so only the lighter colors show and not the black. All right, turn down the opacity and then copy that by going to you know, just option dragging it over to the other one. So if I option drag to that upper one, you see that this is one of those ones that one of those layer styles that you can have multiple of some of the same things. So just be careful, you have to delete the previous one. So there you go. Now it has this dome effect. And so all with you know, with layer styles, you have a good way of representing some of the items that you want to include. There is one other thing. If you wanted to export this into SolidWorks from Illustrator, just be aware that if you wanted to export these as lines, a lot of this stuff are sort of effects in Illustrator, such as this stroke. So if I look at the stroke here, this is basically a line, and the graphic stroke here, this gray line that you see, is being applied from Illustrator. And you know, there's alignment to the stroke, which is the entire stroke is on the inside of this actual geometry. If I flip it, you know, it goes to the outside. But if you were to export this, you know, SolidWorks is just going to see this, just this outside line. It's not going to see the inside line or anything like that. So what you have to do is you have to expand it. Okay, so by that, I mean you have to basically change these into graphics. Okay, so if I select everything, there's also a blend in here in the middle that has to be expanded. I'm going to go to Object, Expand Appearance, and you can see it just dropped in a line on the inside as well. Excuse me. So now there's no longer a stroke necessarily applied to this. Now it's just, they're basically, the appearance has been expanded. And so there's a line on the inside, there's a line on the outside, and there's a fill in between. And I think I might have to expand this one more time. So yeah, so expand, object and fill, say okay. So now they're their own separate elements here. All right, so one good way to check too, to see what it's going to look like in SolidWorks, is you just select everything, turn the fill to none, and the stroke to black. There we go. And so that's what SolidWorks will see. Okay, so I'm gonna, last thing too, is so that SolidWorks can read this, is I'm gonna select these elements, go to File, Export As, and I'll save this as a DWG. Okay, that's why it's pretty universal of, file format. A number of programs can read it, and there's no problem with what version of Illustrator you're on, or if you have Illustrator installed on the PC side, all that good stuff. Just be careful for your units. So in this case, a unit of 1 will be 1 inch, same as I have for my units here, and that'll be in here. So 1 will equal 1. And that's it. The DWG is saved, and I'll see you on the SolidWorks side.